Welcome to Had a Magical Day, the podcast about Disney parks that's like taking a vacation in the middle of your day. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Had a Magical Day. I am your host, Scott Otto. Happy holidays to all of our listeners, and a belated Happy Hanukkah to our Jewish listeners. And I mentioned in the last episode that we have a new format where every 2 weeks we do a new episode. And 1 week it will be a deep dive into a particular topic. Like our last episode was about Christmas in 2023 at Walt Disney World. And then the following episode, 2 weeks later, will be the latest news about the Disney parks. So I go through all of the different newsletters and blogs and stuff, and I find the latest news and I cut through all the clickbait and get to the news that you can use. So without further ado, here is the Disney Parks news for December 21st, 2023. So we're going to start with Hollywood Studios. Earlier this week, Disney had to cancel the last couple of nights of the Jollywood Nights Christmas show at Hollywood Studios because of a big storm that swept up Florida and up the East Coast of the United States. So they canceled that earlier this week, and I don't know if there's another night left. And so this isn't really news you can use, but I mentioned this only because in our last episode, we touched on Jollywood Nights very briefly. I'd never heard of it before. Anne-Marie mentioned it, and she didn't have a lot of the details. So I wanted to give you a little update on what this event is like. And this is information that you can use hopefully for next year if you're interested in going. So the Jollywood Nights is a nighttime Christmas spectacular, much like Mickey's Very Merry Christmas at Magic Kingdom, but this one is at Hollywood Studios, and it did run this past year from November 11th to December 20th. It's $169 per person, even for children. So I went online to check out the ticket prices and buy tickets for an adult and a child. It was $169 for both, not including taxes. And the event runs from 8:30 p.m. to 12:30 a.m. There are rides available that you can go on during that time period. So obviously the lines will be a little shorter than if you go during the day. And you can even get there a little bit earlier, and you can get into the virtual queue for Rise of the Resistance at 8 p.m. So what do they have there? They have all sorts of different events for the holidays. They have a new stage show called Disney Holiday in Hollywood that has lots of characters, the Muppets, there's Kermit the Frog, Miss Piggy, and a bunch of other typical Disney characters that are in there doing different songs and dances and numbers. There is also their own Christmas time fireworks that they do there. And then throughout the park, they have themed entertainment. So they've taken different sections of them and given them different types of Christmas themes. And they also have lots of special food and drinks there as well. So when you look at it on the website, it looks like it's kind of catered more towards the adults, but clearly it's a family event. But some of those adult drinks look pretty delicious, and the food as well. So that might be something you want to check out if you're big on the holiday events. And if you're maybe tired of Mickey's Merry Christmas, or you want to do multiple Christmas events on your next visit there in November and December of 2024. In Tokyo Disneyland, they have announced they are closing the iconic ride of Space Mountain. And this is news that might impact all the Space Mountains down the road at some point. So they're going to do some retheming of the Space Mountain ride. And this is kind of a big deal because the Space Mountain that opened at Disney World in '71 hasn't really been changed at all. And while this is not Disney World, this is Tokyo Disneyland, eventually I think these changes will be incorporated into other versions of Space Mountain. What are they doing exactly? They haven't said, but they have said the ride's going to close on July 31st. And they're going to have a special event called the Final Ignition from April 9th to July 31st. What is that exactly? Well, this is the brilliance of Disney marketing that, they know they have to reimagine these rides from time to time to kind of refresh them and make them new for newer audiences. At the same time, you have a lot of people who have that nostalgia. They want the ride to be exactly the way it was. And so they want to go on that ride the way they remember it one last time. And so they make this into a big event. All it is you just go on the ride like you normally go on the ride, but they're calling it the Final Ignition. Now, what do you think they're going to do? I haven't really read anywhere what they're actually doing for changes. My guess is quite often in Disney, what they do when they use new technology in a new ride, they will then figure out ways to kind of retrofit that technology into older rides. So I think they might do something with Space Mountain similar to how Guardians of the Galaxy works, or the Tron ride, where it's a little more interactive, where there's lots of stuff surrounding you as you're going through the ride. And now in Disneyland, Space Mountain, they retheme it a few times a year into a Star Wars theme. And I was lucky enough to be on that the first time I went to Disneyland. And it's kind of cool. But again, that was mainly in the pre-ride and at the launch. It was kind of Star Warsy. But once you're out there on the track, it was just like Space Mountain for the most part. So I think you'll see something like that here, except I think actually when you're in the ride, there might be all sorts of visuals and going around you as you're whipping around in that Space Mountain, and maybe some extra theming or story to go along with the ride as you're the inline experience. Like I said, at Disney World, they haven't really changed it at all, except for in the inline experience, they've added some games at some point, and even those are pretty old at this point. So anyways, final ignition for Space Mountain and Tokyo Disneyland is July 31st of 2024. Also, they announced for Tokyo Disney Sea. Now, I think we've covered this here before on the show, but if you're not familiar, there's two Disney parks in Tokyo. There's Tokyo Disneyland, which originally these Tokyo businessmen wanted an exact replica of Disneyland in California. But Disney said, no, we want to make it just a little different and incorporate some Japanese elements into it. But it's basically all the rides from Disneyland. It's changed a little bit over the years. And there's a separate park called Tokyo Disney Sea. And they have announced that they're going to do a food and wine festival I think it's the first time over there, which is obviously a very popular event at Epcot and Disney World. So their food and wine festival is going to be April 1st to June 30th of 2024. All right, back to Disney World. So there's a lot of new announcements for 2024 at Disney World. And here's a few of them. So there's going to be new Star Tours scenarios. If you've ever been on the ride, originally they only had a couple different scenarios, or basically videos that you're immersed in as you're going on the ride. And then they made it so there can be different beginnings and endings and stuff like that. So there's a lot of different scenarios now. So you have different experience almost every time you go on the ride, but they're going to add some more in spring of 2024. This is at Disney World, but it'll also be at Disneyland and Disneyland Paris. They're also revamping the Country Bear Jamboree. Again, this is one of those things, as I mentioned before, Space Mountain. There are some people like myself who are very nostalgic for the original ride and don't really want them to change it. But, Walt Disney always imagined that the park and these rides would always be changing and evolving. And it is a pretty old ride at this point. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with that revamp. Also, the Disney dining plan is returning January 9th, 2024. They haven't had it for a few years. So that's coming back. There's different levels. So it can be a very convenient thing for you if you have kids and you're on the go, just to know that you can get a full meal, either for dinner or at lunch or whichever plan you choose, and a snack along the way. And of course, those refillable mugs of soda or water or whatever you drink. Those can be a lifesaver for parents. All right. Also, this is big news. So all of these things are changes that happen because of the pandemic, and then they're starting to go back to normal. So you're all familiar with the park reservation system starting January 9th. And a lot of these changes I'm going to talk about are going into effect January 9th, 2024. Park reservations will no longer be required for date-specific tickets. So if you buy a ticket to go into a park for a certain day, you don't have to then go into the system and reserve the park. For people who have passes, annual passes, those are not date specific. You still need to get a reservation. However, for the annual pass holders, they've started to make these things called good to go days. Starting in January of 2024, there'll be certain days of the year where annual pass holders can just show up and go into the park and not need a reservation. Also, park hopping, which had been limited, first it had been limited altogether. It was eliminated at the beginning of the pandemic. Then they gradually brought it back to be you could park hop after 2 p.m. Now it's back for good, starting January 9th, 2024. You can park hop whenever you want. So if you have a date-specific ticket and you didn't need a park reservation, you can go anywhere at any time that you want. If you have a park reservation for a specific park, you have to go to that park first, but then as soon as you go there, you can go any other park. You don't have to wait till 2. You can just go just like you used to do for park hopping. So that's a nice change for everybody. Also, the Genie Plus ride is changing. They're changing some pricing, of course, but they're also making it a little easier to use. And you'll be able to reserve rides and lightning lanes before you actually go to the park. Quite often now you have to be in the park before you can make these reservations. So that'll be a nice improvement. And also, they're bringing back the Voyage of the Little Mermaid due to the success of the live action movie of the same name. And that will be late 2024. No specific date on that yet. All right, moving along to Disneyland Paris. No big news there, but there are a bunch of rides that are closing for renovations and maintenance. And they're probably not closing permanently, although a couple don't have a reopen date. So Big Thunder Mountain is closing January 29th to March 16th. Mickey's PhilharMagic is closing March 4th with no reopen date. Casey Jr. is closing March 11th with no reopen date currently scheduled. And Phantom Manor is closed. That's their version of the Haunted Mansion if you haven't been there. That's closing from March 11th to March 22nd. And on those same dates, Crush's Coaster will also be closed. Finally, that's a few odds and ends here. Disney Cruise Line, which we include, even though it's not really a park, but it does have a lot of immersive experiences on it. So they are changing the age limit for onboard activities, namely these youth clubs that they have for the kids. You can kind of drop off your kids and they can go on all these little adventures and stuff, and they're monitored by adults. They're changing the age range from 3 to 12 to be 3 to 10, which seems right to me. I mean, there's a big difference in those 2 years of from 10 to 12. Those kids are a little older and maybe not a good fit with a lot of the younger kids. So if you haven't used that service before, you can drop off your children from 9 a.m. to midnight on some ships and up to 1 a.m. on other ships, depending on what ship you're on. And a final note, so the Disney Vacation Club unveiled the new design of Fort Wilderness cabins. And so this has been a theme that's been running for the last couple of years that people aren't too happy about with some of these Disney vacation clubs, because apparently, a lot of the Disney resorts are designed to have a theme that kind of fits in with the park or some connection to it. And so Fort Wilderness, of course, kind of had that rugged wilderness look to it with these log cabins and such. And the same thing happened, I think, with the Polynesian, some other things where they redid them and they've just been very kind of average. So this one, the design, the feedback that people have had online has been either it's sleek and modern, which is nice if you like that, but most people say, it lacks character and theming. It doesn't really fit, doesn't feel like you're in the wilderness. It's too modern. It just feels like a fancy hotel, which is not necessarily what people want when they get some of these resorts. So that is your news for December 21st of 2023. And like I said, we'll be doing the news again in 4 weeks. So basically once a month, you'll get a news episode, and once a month, you'll get a deep dive episode. So thank you for listening, and we'll see you real soon.